To whom did they lose their party? And then what was it that they got that they had always wanted? Those are my two main questions from that.
So when I say Republicans lost their party, the type of Republican that I'm referring to is one that you'd consider to be like a Bush type Republican, kind of because those were the people who were always in charge. They always beat out the insurgent candidates, going back to Pat Buchanan in 1992, even the rise of the Tea Party and Sarah Palin. The insurgents always eventually had to take a back seat to the John Boehner, Mitt Romney establishment, corporate Republican Party. And when Trump came along, that changed. He was and the irony, of course, here is that he's not, or one of many ironies is that he wasn't even really a Republican. Yeah. But he took over the party by leading an insurgency. And it became the first successful insurgency to topple the folks who had always been in charge and who had always partnered with the insurgent wing of the party, thinking that they could develop a constructive relationship, a constructive governing coalition. But it eventually always kind of unraveled because they didn't respect the conservative grassroots. They didn't respect the social conservative activists, the Tea Party types who ultimately comprise the insurgent wing of the Republican Party.
Yeah, for sure. And it's, the Tea Party was pretty successful getting elected, not so successful at staying elected. I don't know is there anybody left from the Tea Party?
They're now like the Freedom Caucus, but even...
like the people that got elected in 2010, I think Michelle Bachmann's gone. What's his name? Steve King. He got ripped because he's a lunatic.
Got booted.
There were a couple of other ones. I think Cruz came in sometime around then too, but he moved.
Even in 2012, Rubio, but now Rubio's not Tea Party, right? He's tried to reinvent himself a few times, but he went from being like the conservative renegade to being establishment, big money, corporate Republican pretty quickly. So even the ones that started out as Tea Party aren't really fully. I guess you have a handful, maybe like Jim Jordan. I forget when he got elected. But they're all basically the Tea Party has kind of, this isn't exactly an original thought, but that became the Trump movement. And a lot of those guys were more are now kind of always were anti-liberal. Yes, they were conservative in a lot of ways, but what defines the Republican Party right now is more of like an anti-liberal attitude than anything else. So it's when I say the Republicans lost their party, they lost it. The establishment Republicans lost it to people like that, and the efforts decades long to tamp that down, to try to silence those people or to co-opt them, finally broke with Trump. And when I say they got everything that they ever wanted in losing their party, what it's hard for me not to look at the Supreme Court right now and the decades-long campaign from the right to remake the court into a conservative-leaning institution and see that Republicans did get everything they wanted, because that ultimately will be the enduring legacy of the Trump presidency, regardless of whether or not he runs and wins another term again. And you need to look no farther than Roe v. Wade and what appears very likely to happen when the court decides that case later this spring. The culmination of this, again, decades-long project to undo that decision is I think the paramount goal from the conservative movement of the last generation. And they're on the cusp of achieving that because, ironically enough, of a formerly pro-choice former Democrat from Manhattan who considered himself to be socially progressive.
All right. Do you, that's funny. Do you think there's a real chance? I don't feel like there's a real chance of that happening. I don't think Roberts will allow that to happen. I mean, he's on issues of individual liberty. He's been pretty consistent, and he takes a lot of heat from Republicans now. They don't like him very much anymore. Well, not Republicans so much, but conservative people who vote Republican, I guess, or whatever. I'm not even sure if people who identify as conservative know what the fuck that word means anymore. I know that most people who call themselves liberal don't know what that means either, right?
No.
Or at least we've redefined all the words. But
so I don't understand it in the classical sense. I
agree. Do you think that this Tea Party that turned into Trump insurgency, do you think they were angrier at liberal Democrats because of, I'm sure some of it was about Obama, but a lot of it was just the programming from Newt Gingrich's side of the party for years, and Frank Luntz and all those assholes. Do you think they were madder at them or madder at what they call rhinos, Republicans in name only, that, like George W. Bush, who started 2 wars, and an actual conservative, for those of you who don't know, is pretty anti-interventionist. Like, we don't do that kind of shit, and don't really approve of it either, and unless it's an extreme case. Like the Gulf War I, that was a pretty good use of our military power. And it was measured, and it had a very specific goal. We met that goal, and then we left. Now, Bush
took very broad public support.
Yes, right? Yeah. An actual coalition, not a coalition of the willing, whatever the fuck that means. But do you think, and then Bush also presided, as I said before, over the largest expansion of the federal government in history, which is not exactly conservative. So do you think it was, just in your opinion, you've been covering this shit for a long time. Do you feel like it was more anger towards liberals or more anger towards my own party? Fuck me. So fuck these guys.
I think the reason it was successful is because it was more the latter. It was the anger at the leadership of the party. And that's why you get such a potent insurgency, as the title of the book says. It's like that those people were angrier at the betrayal that they perceived than they were at the left. Yes, of course, they were angry at Bill Clinton, and they, mocked him as a womanizing hypocrite and a sleazebag and all that. But the more motivating anger was toward their own party, because they felt like they cut deals with establishment Republicans like Bush, and they never got the respect that they deserve. I detail in one of my chapters about Trump's kind of strange relationship with the religious right, which ended up being more cooperative and collaborative than I think anybody could have imagined. This social conservative activist who runs one of the big groups in Washington, telling me about his interaction with the W. Bush White House. And Bush was an evangelical, let's not forget. And this activist said to me, Bush thought he didn't need to deal with us. He didn't need to listen to us because he was one of us and he knew what to do. Trump, the lesson from of Donald Trump there is that Trump wasn't, of course, an evangelical. Didn't understand that world in terms of what they believed. I think he understood them culturally very well, but the detailed belief system of an evangelical Christian he had no clue about. So he deferred to them with a lot of decision making and policy, and it ended up being a partnership that was incredibly beneficial and politically advantageous for him.
Yeah, for sure. Does that Bush assuming he would get the evangelical vote because of his, relationships, does that sound a little bit like the statement, if you aren't going to vote for me, you ain't black? I mean, it kind of feels the same to me. I think that was a huge that's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard a politician in a campaign say. But I agree with you 100% about. I've always thought it was more anger at the Republican establishment. I also think because they were angrier at Republicans, the Republican establishment, than they were at liberals, then the actual establishment Republicans, the elected officials, and all these nameless, faceless bureaucrats that operate behind the scenes were terrified of Trump and his little merry band of hyper focused and hyper energized political activists. Like he created what we call in marketing a firebrand, right? Which is to say, force multipliers all over the place. And you could tell that despite what they may have said behind the scenes or got caught saying here and there, all of these people were super afraid of Trump. Like they thought he was gonna, they really seemed to, and maybe this is speculation on my part, but they really seemed like they thought he could end their careers or at least box them out of things.
Well, and that's why I think to this day you still see such little open dissent from. You see it from the usual players, right? Like Mitt Romney, because he doesn't have anything to lose. If he's in Utah, he's still incredibly popular. And Utah's just, it's an outlier. But Romney's an outlier within the Republican Party, and that he's look at Rubio, or look at any other kind of Republican like Cruz, right, who still has presidential aspirations, and they are afraid of Trump. I think the finer point there is it's not just that they're afraid of Trump, it's that they're afraid of his voters.